Those are just a few things that I've experienced over the last 3.5 years. They were not possible while in your company because you would not allow me to do so. I tried to carve out a way with you both, tried many different methods at the emotional expense of myself. I simply cannot give that up, to finally be free of your emotional shackles, the same ones that I've worn since I was a child, the ones you gave me to serve your own selfish purposes. You claim to be broken people because of all that has transpired, but I know that's just a lie to elicit guilt and obedience just like everything else that comes out of your mouths. It remains true that leaving you was the most important and life-changing choice I have ever made. I will never go back to the old way of life. As I sit here and edit this 15 years later, that was not the last time, not even close. The rebound effect was huge in our family. Everyone would make up due to nostalgia or some random holiday, then we would hate each other again within a year. Ponder this in the end. The only thing that you blame me for is leaving. You both actually expect me to stay around for all this. I can see that it drives you nuts as well, so why subject yourself to it? Because blood's thicker than water? I've searched for years for my stake in all this, but I can't find anything viable that me or my family did to you. Everyone makes mistakes, of course. I can accept mine. We did everything you ever wanted. Neither of you are coming back to me complaining about my terrible behavior. It always comes down to me dealing with your terrible behavior. We always paid you back money we'd borrowed. We were careful not to rely on you too much. We took care of you as best we could while we were disrespected. We reacted to this type of issue the only way we knew how. We requested respect and boundaries. They were not given, so we subtracted ourselves from the equation. Think about it yourself. Did we ever say no to any request that you asked of us? We always worked with you. When we tried to say no, did you give us grief over it? Yes, always. Consequently, we learned not to ever say no. Every time I or we did, it was met with some sort of tantrum or outright denial. People should be allowed to say no and not have to explain themselves. Unfortunately, this is how I was trained from a young age. While my sister rebelled, I receded. I was scared to death of Dad and his evil looks. I learned to avoid them. All the while, my mother was working to manipulate my mind in the background. I ran into the brick wall over and over. I only smiled and died inside. But I did what I thought would make everyone else happy. You might recall when my son got free movie tickets a few years ago. We decided to have family time with just the three of us. My son mentioned them to my mother in passing, so my mother promptly let me know how she felt because she was not invited. She lays on the guilt without shame. As always, I caved in and let her go. As a condition, I asked her to come over, and we would drive from my house since I didn't want to be exposed to my father because he was being particularly mean at that point in time. My request was met with resistance, but I didn't budge this time. When she walked into my house, she huffed and puffed her way in, apparently let me know she was inconvenienced, but I was not sure as always. She walked out of the movie about half an hour into it, and sat in the lobby the entire time. I do admit it was a terrible movie, but sat through it out of respect for all involved. When the movie finished, I decided not to mention anything, and my mother stayed quiet and tense all the way home. She would sigh every once in a while to let on maybe she was starting to cry or something. I was not sure about that, but I wasn't going to entertain it this time. I had overlooked this behavior for many years. I was determined to stick to my guns. I really did not know what all the strife was about. It's just a movie. We're all simply going to a movie together. This gets us into the meat of my mother's psychological disorders. Do you think it was possible that my mother could have let us just go be a family on our own in the first place and not pushed her way into it? Especially since we always included our mother in everything in the past? Do you think that you could have had a good time and not tried to put that guilt on everyone? People like to do things on their own sometimes. It was not a personal hit against anyone. I get excluded from things that my mother does with her life. I do not carry any guilt for that particular situation because I did nothing wrong. I have to fight with that idea because you lay on guilt so heavy. It was something that did not have to happen, but ended up being one of the final straws that reinforced my decision to leave. I would have never done anything like that to either of you. I never have. It would actually make me feel a sense of security if you would have done things without me, which I'm sure you did a great deal of things in my absence my entire life. It never occurred to me to care about your personal lives. As I edit this almost 50 years old, and I haven't spoken to my mother in 2 years, I can still feel the desperation that came with having a relationship with her. I was a tool of hers. She methodically kept me on her side through tactics such as guilt. She never gave an inch. I was never correct about anything. I always had to sacrifice my emotions while she did not sacrifice hers. If she was backed into a corner, she was either belligerent or go quiet. To this day, I've never heard my mother mention anything about fault on her part for anything. That is absolutely, definitely true with my mother. As I look back, you'd think that there would be one moment of clarity. And I can remember no time where my mother looked at me and said, I mean, anything, even if she accidentally left, something in your way and you tripped over it. To admit anything. And that's really not too bad of a problem necessarily. It's a little bit dysfunctional. But when she laid it onto everybody else so heavy, not only would she not take that guilt, she would displace that guilt. She found it very necessary to put and then multiply it by a great deal. And I was just like right in her crosshairs. That was the problem with me. Like my sister was 7 years older, is 7 years older than me, and she was able to go. She had friends and stuff, and I, at 8 years old, when she was like teenager and more, I couldn't really escape. And from what I look at in the past, my mother did count on that. And when I finally got to about 13 or 14 years old, started playing more, not so much playing more sports as being more involved in my friends and playing sports, I remember that being a very difficult time for her because I was leaving that codependency that she had created with me. And she worked very hard on it. When I was young, we did everything together. They always blamed me for leaving. By the time we got into it, they'd be like, it's like, you wouldn't even have to mention it. And then something would come up and they'd say, well, you left, So that kind of takes you to the end of it. And it's like, well, what do I got? I'd be like, well, you're just a douche. So that's why I left. And that just did not matter. It was just this constant circle of which I got tired of. And my sister got very tired of. We were tired of like immediately. The movie ticket thing with my mother, with my son, absolutely would happen all the time. I wouldn't know. In this particular situation, nothing was said, and then my son just kind of said, "Hey, we're going to a movie," and then she calls me and says, "Well, why didn't you invite me to the movie?" So I just feel terrible for anybody that has to deal with that kind of stuff. And when I say getting into the meat of my mom's psychological disorder, I spoke a lot about histrionics, and histrionics being the center of attention, and that's really one of the main things that I could say about her was that center of attention. This obviously illustrates it, that she took a situation that wasn't her business and thrust herself in the middle of it, and by the end of it, she was the center of attention. It's pretty much textbook when it comes to just, let's not even call it histrionic personality disorder, let's just call it self-centered and selfish behavior. We've all seen it before. So it's very difficult to deal with your mother. And once again, I would always say, please, when you see your children, only find love for them. And if you do that kind of stuff, you have to check yourself.